The wind rolled across the valley like a whisper from heaven, brushing through tall pines and over the old wooden fences that guarded the last lonely town before the mountains, Iron Creek. It was the kind of place where time moved slower and hearts grew harder, where men drank to forget and women prayed to remember, and where folks talked more than they ever listened. But that morning the town's silence broke under the sound of a wagon wheel creaking down Main Street. Inside the wagon sat a young woman, her shoulders wrapped in a faded green prairie shawl, her brown hair tied in a loose bun that struggled against the wind. Her name was Clara May, and though she had the softest heart this side of the Rockies, folks didn't see that. They saw only her size, the way her dress strained at the seams, the way she carried herself like someone always bracing for a cruel word. She had heard them all before. Fat girl, useless, too much for any man's back or heart. But she kept her head down because hope was the only thing she owned that couldn't be taken from her. The wagon stopped in front of the general store, and the driver, a ranch hand named Ross, jumped down. "This here's Iron Creek, miss. You'll find work if you're lucky." Clara nodded softly, clutching her small bundle of belongings, an old Bible, a comb, and her mother's scarf. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, stepping down. As she did, a group of men lounging outside the saloon turned to watch. "Look what the wind blew in," one chuckled, spitting tobacco. "She'd break a horse before she rode it." Laughter followed, sharp and cutting, echoing down the dusty street. Clara froze, her cheeks burning, but said nothing. She'd learned long ago that answering cruelty only gave it more teeth. Instead, she walked on, her steps heavy but steady, toward the only building that offered a hint of mercy, the church. Inside it was quiet, warm. The smell of candles and pine filled the air. She knelt at the front pew, whispering a prayer. "Lord," she murmured, "I don't ask for much. Just someone who sees me, someone who don't laugh when I breathe." Outside, a shadow passed the window, a tall man with broad shoulders, wearing a long duster coat dusted white from travel. His beard was gray at the edges, and his eyes carried the weight of winters spent alone. Elijah Boone, known by few and spoken of by many, the Mountain Man. He came to town only when supplies ran out or when he needed to trade pelts for salt and flour. He was a quiet man, but there was something about him that made even the loudest mouths fall silent when he walked by. As he tied his horse by the hitching post, he glanced toward the church window and saw her. Not the way the others did. He didn't notice her size first. He noticed her eyes. There was something in them, something raw and pleading, the same look he'd seen once in a wounded doe he'd freed from a trap. He didn't know why, but his feet turned toward the door, and a moment later he stepped inside. The wooden boards creaked under his boots. Clara turned quickly, startled. "Oh, sorry, sir. I didn't mean to be in the way." Elijah shook his head. "Ain't no harm in praying," he said, his voice deep and steady like the mountain streams. He looked around, nodding toward the empty pews. "Don't see many folks here these days. Guess folks only come when they're desperate," she said softly. He gave a small, knowing smile. "That so? You desperate, miss?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "Maybe a little, maybe a lot." For a moment, silence stretched between them, the kind that feels heavy but not cruel. Then Elijah said, "Name's Elijah Boone. Most just call me Eli." "Clara May," she replied. "Just Clara's fine." "Well, Clara," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "the Lord listens harder than people do." "Don't let him make you forget that," she smiled faintly, the first real smile she'd shown in days. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." He nodded once, then turned to leave, but something in her voice stopped him, something fragile and sincere. "You live up in the mountains, don't you?" "That's right. Must be peaceful up there. No one laughing, no one watching." Eli paused at the door. "Sometimes. Gets quiet, though. Too quiet." "I think I'd like quiet," she whispered. He turned back, looking at her, really looking, and something in his chest stirred. He'd lived alone since his wife died years ago, buried under the snow that took half the valley that winter. He'd thought his heart had frozen too, but standing there, seeing Clara's shy hope flicker beneath years of pain, he felt warmth again. "Maybe you would," he said softly, and then walked out into the sun. For the rest of that day, neither could stop thinking of the other. The mountain man who'd forgotten how to care, and the girl the world had stopped caring about. A few days later, Clara found herself working at the tavern, scrubbing tables while laughter rang from men who'd never worked half as hard as she did. The barkeep, Mrs. Harland, was kind enough, but even she whispered pity behind her back. Poor thing, she'd say. Won't ever find a husband like that. Clara pretended not to hear. That night, as rain lashed the windows, the tavern door swung open, and Eli stepped in, soaked but calm. Every head turned. "Well, look who's come down from the mountain," someone laughed. Old Boone himself. Eli ignored them, walking straight to the counter. His eyes found Clara, and for the first time in years, he smiled. "Evening, Miss Clara," he said. She blinked, startled. "Mr. Boone!" "You're out in this storm?" "Had to trade some pelts," he said, setting a bundle on the counter. "And maybe see a friendly face." The men nearby snickered. "Friendly face, huh? Don't tell me it's hers." Eli turned his gaze on them, quiet but fierce. "You boys ever get tired of hearing yourselves talk?" The room went still. No one spoke. Clara's eyes widened, her heart pounding. No one had ever defended her like that. Eli leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. "You mind sitting with me for supper?" She hesitated. "Me? Don't see no one else I'd rather eat with." And so they sat, two lonely souls in the corner of a noisy tavern, sharing stew and silence that felt like home. He asked about her past. She told him little, but enough, that she'd lost her mother young, that her father drank himself to death, that she'd wandered from town to town, looking for a place where she wasn't laughed at. Eli listened, not to answer, but to understand. "You ever get tired of running?" he asked. "Every day," she whispered. "Then maybe you should stop," he said simply. "Ain't nothing wrong with staying put if you find the right spot. And where's that?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes gentle. "You'll know when you find someone worth staying for." She didn't dare meet his gaze after that. Something unspoken hung between them, fragile as glass. When he left, he tipped his hat and said, "Take care, Miss Clara." She watched him go, her heart torn between fear and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Days turned into weeks. Eli came to town more often, bringing pelts and firewood, always stopping by the tavern, always asking for her stew. Folks started whispering. "Boone's lost his mind," they said. "Of all the women he picks her." But he didn't care. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Eli found Clara sitting by the river outside town. Her reflection wavered in the water, her eyes distant. "You planning to stay here long?" he asked. She shrugged. "Don't rightly know. Ain't got nowhere else?" He sat beside her, the earth cool beneath them. "You ever think about the mountains?" "Sometimes," she said softly. "They seem so far, like they belong to better people." He chuckled. "Ain't no better people, Clara. Just folks trying to survive." She smiled faintly. "I'd like to see it, maybe once." "Then come," he said. She looked up sharply. "What?" "Come with me. I've got room. You can help with the cabin. Don't pay much, but it's honest living." "Eli, I can't. People would talk." "They already do," he said with a shrug. "Let 'em." She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Why me?" His voice softened. "'Cause I don't need anything else but you." The words hit her like thunder, simple, raw, and true. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Then tears spilled silently down her cheeks. "No one's ever said that to me," she whispered. Eli reached out, his rough hand covering hers. "Then it's about damn time someone did." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the water, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a joke, but as a woman worth choosing. She looked at the man beside her, the mountain in human form, and realized her prayer had been answered in the most unexpected way. Not with gold or beauty or a promise of ease, but with a heart that wanted hers, just as it was. And as the sun set behind the pines, Clara May made her choice. "All right," she whispered. "I'll come." The next morning, the world seemed to hold its breath as Clara May packed what little she had. A small satchel with her mother's scarf, her Bible, and a tin comb that had seen better days. The townsfolk whispered behind their curtains as she walked toward the stables where Elijah Boone waited, his horse saddled and his wagon ready. "There she goes," someone muttered, "following that mountain ghost like a fool." But Clara didn't turn her head, not once. Her heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and freedom. She had spent her whole life running from ridicule, and now, for the first time, She was running toward something. Eli tipped his hat when he saw her approach. "You sure about this, Clara?" "Ain't no easy life up there. Cold winds, long nights." She nodded firmly. "I've had cold and long nights before, Eli. I'll take 'em if it means peace." His lips curved into a quiet smile. "All right then. Climb aboard." The wagon rattled out of Iron Creek, leaving behind the only life she'd ever known. The dirt road wound through pine forests and over narrow ridges where hawks circled high above. For hours they traveled in silence, broken only by the creak of the wheels and the whisper of wind. Now and then Eli would glance at her, watching the way she looked out the window, curious, cautious, like a bird afraid to believe it was free. "You ever been this far from town?" he asked. "Never," she said softly. "It feels like the world gets quieter the higher we go." "That's the mountain's way," he replied. "It don't judge, don't mock. It just listens." By dusk the cabin came into view, a sturdy structure built into the hillside, smoke rising gently from the chimney. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed. "Built it with my own hands," Eli said, pride softening his voice. "Took me years, but she's held through every storm." When they stepped inside, the air smelled of pine wood and stew. A fire crackled in the hearth, its glow chasing the chill from the room. Eli set her things down gently. "Ain't much, but it's home." She turned slowly, taking in the simple beauty, the worn wooden table, the handmade shelves lined with jars, the old quilt draped over the bed. "It's more home than I've ever had," she whispered. That night, as snow began to fall outside, they ate together by the fire. She told him stories of her mother singing hymns by candlelight, of how she'd once dreamed of learning to read poetry, of how she'd given up believing in happy endings. Eli listened, his rough hands folded on the table, his eyes soft. "You ought to dream again, Clara," he said quietly. "Dreams don't belong to the pretty or the rich. They belong to the ones strong enough to hold on." She smiled faintly, tears glinting in the firelight. "You really believe that?" "I do," he said. "'Cause I stopped dreaming once. Thought love was a thing that died with her, but maybe it just needed time." The air between them stilled, full of warmth that words couldn't carry. Clara looked down, shy. "You talk like a man who's seen too much." "Maybe," he said, "but I'd rather see too much than feel nothing." Days passed and Clara began to settle into her new rhythm. She helped with chores, learned to chop kindling, even tried her hand at cooking wild rabbit stew. At first she was clumsy, spilling flour, burning bread, but Eli never raised his voice. "We all learn by messing up," he'd say with a grin. Slowly, laughter began to return to her voice, the kind that hadn't escaped her lips since she was a child. Sometimes she'd hum while sweeping the porch and Eli would stop what he was doing just to listen. One morning he found her feeding the hens, her cheeks rosy in the cold air. "You make this place feel alive again," he said simply. She looked at him, surprised. "You mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." There was a pause, a softness that grew between them like spring grass through frost. That evening a storm rolled in, fierce and howling. The wind battered the shutters, snow piling against the door. The fire flickered and Clara shivered, drawing her shawl tighter. "It's bad out there," she said. Eli nodded. "Ain't nothing to fear. Storms come and go. What matters is who you ride 'em out with." He handed her a cup of hot tea, their fingers brushing. She froze, feeling her pulse quicken. "Thank you, Eli," she whispered. "For everything." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. You've done more for me than you know." "How could I?" she asked softly. "I'm just—" "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't say just. You ain't just anything." "You're you, and that's enough." Tears filled her eyes, and before she could stop them, one slipped down her cheek. Eli reached out, brushing it away with the back of his hand. His touch was gentle, reverent, as though he were afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. "You've been carrying pain too long, Clara May," he said. "You can put it down now." She looked up at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "How?" He smiled faintly. "Let me help." And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The walls she'd built brick by brick began to crumble. She didn't feel unworthy. She didn't feel too much or too little. She felt seen, truly seen for the first time. When the storm passed, the world outside was blanketed in white. The cabin looked like something out of a dream, smoke curling into the pale morning sky. They stepped out together, the snow crunching underfoot. It's beautiful, Clara whispered. A clean slate, Eli said. World's been wiped fresh. Ain't that something? She nodded, smiling. Maybe I can start fresh, too. You already have, he said. As days turned to weeks, life grew simple and peaceful. They trapped rabbits, collected firewood, shared long evenings talking by the fire. But beneath the calm, something deeper bloomed, a love unspoken yet understood. One night, Eli found her sitting outside, gazing at the stars. You cold? He asked, draping his coat over her shoulders. A little, she said, smiling. But I like the stars. They remind me how small my troubles really are. He sat beside her, the sky stretching endless above them. You ever wonder if the good Lord put us together on purpose? I think maybe he did, she said softly. 'Cause you're the only man who ever looked at me like I was worth something. He turned toward her, his voice low. You are worth more than gold, Clara. Don't let the world tell you otherwise. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. Why are you so kind to me, Eli? 'Cause kindness don't cost nothing, and you've paid enough for other folks' cruelty. A tear slipped down her cheek. You talk like you know pain. I do, he said quietly. Lost my wife to fever. Buried her in the snow. Thought that was the end of love for me. But then you came along, and I realized maybe love don't die. Maybe it just changes faces. Clara's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. Eli, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say nothing, he murmured. Just stay. And she did. The spring thaw came slow that year, melting snow into streams that rushed down the mountain like veins of silver, feeding life back into the earth. Clara May stood by the cabin door one morning, watching the mist rise off the valley below. Her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her brown hair loose and soft in the gentle breeze. Eli watched her from where he split firewood, his axe glinting in the pale sunlight. It amazed him still how her presence could make the coldest morning feel warm. He'd lived in silence for years, surrounded by pine and wind and memory, but now there was laughter in his home again, gentle, unassuming laughter that made his heart remember how to beat. Clara had grown stronger since the winter. She could carry water from the creek, knead bread with steady hands, and move with a quiet confidence that had once been buried under shame. She still blushed easily, still second-guessed herself, but when she smiled, it reached her eyes now. Eli noticed every small change, every moment of light she brought into his world. You keep staring like that, she teased one morning. You'll split your thumb instead of that wood. He grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Can't help it. Hard to look away when the sun's out. Her cheeks turned pink, and she looked down, pretending to scold him. You say things you don't mean. No, Clara, he said softly. Not a word I don't mean. The days grew longer, the air sweeter. Together they planted a small garden behind the cabin, beans, potatoes, a patch of corn, and each evening they sat on the porch as the sky blazed gold and red. Clara would hum softly, old church tunes her mother had sung, and Eli would listen with a heart that felt full for the first time in decades. But peace never lasts long in a world that loves to test gentle souls. One afternoon, Eli had to ride down to Iron Creek for supplies. Clara wanted to come, but he shook his head. Town ain't kind, Clara, not yet. Let me handle it. She nodded, though her stomach twisted. When he reached town, the whispers started before he even dismounted. There's the mountain man, someone said. Heard he's shacking up with that big girl he dragged off. Another spat tobacco into the dirt. Disgrace, that's what it is. The man could have had any woman. Eli ignored them, but their words burned like frostbite. He bought what he needed, flour, salt, lamp oil, and turned to leave when Sheriff Maddox called out from the porch of the saloon. Boone! The sheriff was a broad man with a red face and too much whiskey in his gut. Heard you been keeping company up there with that fat girl. The crowd chuckled. Eli's jaw tightened. You got something worth saying, Sheriff? Just wondering what a man like you sees in a woman like her. Ain't natural. The laughter grew. Eli stepped closer, his voice low but steady. You don't know her. You don't know half the strength it takes to smile when folks like you won't let her forget her scars. The sheriff sneered. You in love with her, Boone? Or just feel sorry for her? Eli's gaze turned hard as flint. You ever talk about her again, you'll regret it. The sheriff's smirk faltered and Eli turned his back, mounting his horse. As he rode out, he heard the mutters fade behind him, but he knew gossip would spread like wildfire. Back at the cabin, Clara was tending the stew when he returned. "You were gone long," she said, smiling softly. "Everything all right?" Eli forced a nod. "Fine, just talking took longer than it should." But Clara knew something was wrong. That night, when he sat by the fire staring into the flames, she touched his shoulder gently. "What did they say, Eli?" He hesitated, then sighed. "They said things that don't matter. Small men talk loud when they're scared of something they don't understand. They were talking about me, weren't they?" Her voice trembled. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "They don't know you, Clara. Don't let their poison in." Tears welled in her eyes anyway. "But they always talk, Eli. My whole life they've talked. I thought maybe here, maybe with you, it'd stop." He reached for her hand. "You can't silence ignorance, but you can live louder than it. And what if they laugh at you too?" "Let 'em! I've been laughed at before. Doesn't change what's true." "And what's that?" She whispered. "That I want you. That I choose you." Her tears spilled freely now, but she smiled through them, pressing her forehead against his chest. "Why do you keep fighting for me?" she asked. "'Cause you're worth fighting for," he said. The next morning she rose early and walked down to the river, staring at her reflection in the water. For years she had seen nothing but shame there, a stranger shaped by other people's cruelty. But now, when she looked, she saw strength. She saw a woman who had survived storms, who had learned to laugh again, who was loved, not for what she lacked, but for what she was. She cupped the cold water in her hands and let it run down her face, whispering to the sky, "Thank you, Lord, for sending him." Later that week, a rider came from town, a young boy delivering a letter from the church. Clara opened it, her hands shaking. Inside was a message from Reverend Walsh asking her to come sing at the Sunday service. "They must be mocking me," she said, her voice cracking. Eli shook his head. "No, maybe they finally see something you don't. But I can't," she said. "What if they laugh?" "Then you sing louder," he said. "Sing so loud they can't hear their hate." She looked into his eyes, steady and sure, and something inside her shifted again. That Sunday she dressed in her green prairie dress and braided her hair, her hands trembling as she tied her shawl. Eli rode with her, silent but proud. When they reached the small church, whispers rose among the townsfolk. But this time Clara didn't lower her head. She walked straight to the front, the morning light streaming through the windows like grace itself. When she began to sing, her voice trembling at first, then strong, the room fell silent. The sound was raw, pure, carrying years of hurt and hope in every note. Even the men who had mocked her days before couldn't meet her gaze. Eli watched from the back, his chest swelling with pride. When she finished, there was a pause, then a slow, hesitant clap. And then another. Soon the whole room was clapping, standing, moved in a way they couldn't explain. Tears streamed down Clara's face. She looked at Eli, who smiled softly and tipped his hat. Later, as they rode home, she said, "I felt free, Eli. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't invisible." He nodded. "You ain't been invisible for a long time, Clara. You just needed to see yourself the way I do." She reached over, taking his hand. "You make me believe I can be more than what they said." "You already are," he said. The evening light bathed the mountains in gold, and for the first time in years, Clara May laughed, a sound so bright it echoed through the trees like a promise. But far off a storm was brewing, one that would test everything they'd built. Summer came fierce that year, the mountains humming with life, rivers running full and wild, and the cabins standing proud beneath a canopy of green. Clara and Eli had settled into a rhythm that felt like forever. Mornings filled with work and laughter, evenings with songs and quiet prayers. The world around them no longer felt like a place to hide from, but one to belong to. Yet the world beyond their valley wasn't done testing them. One afternoon, a group of riders came up the trail, 3 men from Iron Creek, rough ranchers who'd had too much whiskey and too little sense. They dismounted near the cabin, calling out with mocking laughter, "Boone, you up here, boy? Heard you married yourself a mountain cow." Eli stepped out onto the porch, his eyes cold, his voice steady. "You got one chance to leave, boys." The leader, a tall man named Hank Porter, smirked. "We just want to see the lady who stole your brains." Clara stepped into the doorway before Eli could stop her, her hands trembling but her chin lifted. "You've seen her," she said quietly. "Now leave," Hank sneered. "Well, ain't you brave for a big girl?" The others laughed, but before they could take another step, Eli moved like thunder, grabbing Hank by the collar and slamming him against the hitching post. You ever speak her name again, I'll make sure you choke on your teeth. The other men froze, realizing they'd gone too far. We didn't mean nothing, one stammered. Then ride, Eli growled. They did, spurring their horses down the trail, dust rising behind them. Clara stood still, shaking, tears welling in her eyes. Eli, she whispered, they'll never stop, will they? He turned to her, his expression softening. Maybe not, but you don't fight hate with hate. You live so true it burns 'em to ash. She stepped closer, pressing her forehead to his chest. I don't know what I did to deserve you. Maybe it ain't about deserving, he said. Maybe it's about need, and I don't need anything but you. That night, rain began to fall, a slow, steady rhythm that grew into a storm unlike any they'd seen. The wind screamed through the pines, the river swelled, and lightning split the sky. Eli rushed to secure the barn, shouting over the roar of thunder. Stay inside, Clara. But when a tree cracked and crashed near the barn, trapping one of their horses, Clara ran out into the rain without thinking. Eli! She screamed, her dress whipping in the wind. He saw her just as she slipped on the slick ground, falling hard. Clara! He was beside her in seconds, pulling her up. I told you to stay. You needed help, she gasped. You don't get to fight storms alone anymore. Together they freed the horse, cutting the tangled reins, dragging the frightened animal to safety. By the time they got back to the cabin, they were soaked to the bone, shivering but laughing. A wild, breathless laughter that came from survival itself. He wrapped her in blankets, holding her close by the fire. You're something else, Clara May, he murmured. So are you, Elijah Boone, she whispered back. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin there was peace, a warmth deeper than the fire's glow. When dawn came, the valley lay silver and still, mist curling over the water like smoke from heaven. Clara woke to find Eli sitting on the porch, carving something with his knife. What are you making? She asked, stepping out beside him. He smiled, holding up a small wooden heart strung on a piece of leather. For you, he said. Ain't fancy, but it's true. She took it in her hands, tears filling her eyes. It's beautiful. You make everything beautiful, he said. Even me. That day they rode down to town together for the first time since the gossip. When they reached Iron Creek, the townsfolk stared, but something in their eyes had changed. Word of Clara's singing had spread. The church had grown fuller each Sunday since. Reverend Walsh himself came out to greet them. Miss Clara, he said kindly, you've done something powerful here. Folks are starting to see different, she smiled humbly. I just sang, Reverend. No, he said softly. You reminded people what grace looks like. As they walked through town, a few women nodded politely. A child even waved. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a start. At the general store, old Mrs. Harlan stepped out and handed Clara a jar of preserves. On the house, she said gruffly. For that voice of yours. Clara blinked back tears. Thank you. That night, back in their valley, she and Eli sat beneath the stars, the world quiet and kind. You know, she said softly, for the first time, I'm not afraid of tomorrow. Eli wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Ain't nothing to fear when you've already walked through the worst. Do you ever think, she whispered, that maybe we were both just waiting for each other? He smiled. I don't think. I know. The years passed gentle as a creek in spring. The garden grew, the cabin aged with grace, and laughter filled every corner of their world. Clara's voice became known across the valley. She sang at weddings, at harvest festivals, and once even at the funeral of the sheriff who'd mocked her years before. Folks said her voice could heal hearts, and maybe it did, because every time she sang, Eli would look at her like she was the first sunrise he'd ever seen. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands worn but always intertwined. On a quiet autumn evening, as the sun bled gold over the peaks, Clara sat on the porch, the wooden heart he'd carved still hanging from her neck. Eli sat beside her, silent for a long time before he spoke. You know, Clara, I used to think the mountains were all I needed. The quiet, the solitude. But turns out they were just waiting for you too. She smiled, eyes glistening. And I used to think I wasn't meant to be loved. But you proved me wrong every day. The wind rustled through the pines like a hymn. You gave me back my faith, he said. You gave me back my courage, she whispered. Guess we saved each other, Guess we did. As twilight deepened, Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. Eli? Yeah, darling? Promise me something. Anything. That you'll keep singing my song when I'm gone. His throat tightened, but he nodded. Ain't a day I won't. Years later, when folks passed the old cabin, they'd still hear a man humming softly by the fire, a tune carried by love, loss, and the kind of faith that never dies. Some said it was just the wind through the pines. Others swore it was Elijah Boone, keeping his promise. But those who knew the story, the real story, understood that love like theirs doesn't fade. It lingers like smoke, like sunlight, like prayer. And when the mountain winds whispered down through Iron Creek, they carried words only the heart could hear. I don't need anything but you.